Ready? Okay, can you hear me? Oh, perfect. Well, welcome everyone. My name's Dan Lewin. I'm the chair of the Churchill Club this year and also a vice president here at Microsoft. This is my building, our campus. We're glad to have you here. I always like to ask the question when we get to have the honor of hosting a Churchill Club event here to find out how many people who are in the audience today have never been on this campus before. Perfect. I love that. This is really good. So let me do a very brief welcome to Microsoft in Silicon Valley. For those who don't know, there's about 3,000 people that work for Microsoft in Silicon Valley doing development. In general, one of the things, given the topic, I thought I would comment on about our community, the people who work for the company and the things that the company's done. These physical buildings have been here for a little more than 10 years. Nearly 7 years ago, we went solar on this campus. There's a huge percentage, double-digit percentage of the campus is powered by solar panels. We were the first and largest one in the state of California by a long shot. Virtually everything in this building is recycled. All the tiles, the floor tiles, the seating materials, everything else. So it's all recyclable, all the chairs and tables and things that you were on. And we do all kinds of things for our employees with transportation services and things of that ilk. And when the campus was built, one of the things that we did is worked with the city of Mountain View to integrate the trails. If anybody does hiking or jogging or biking and knows of that trail system that runs from the Baylands all the way to the ocean, well, Microsoft was responsible for helping and working with the city, because this was a green field here that is now built up. But we cut the path that connects the Baylands hikeway all the way, and eventually we'll go over 101 as they contribute over time to this full build-out. So anyway, a little bit of trivia about Microsoft, and thank you for coming. So more importantly, and on to the program tonight, on behalf of the Churchill Club, I would like to welcome you to tonight's program. This is a very good topic. The question was posed, is it a hot topic? We'll certainly find out, called the Smart Grid, and I'm wondering why we're calling it What's Next, because what I want to know is what's going on right now, and so maybe you'll talk about that on the panel as well, because I think there's a lot to be learned. Our panelists tonight, Elisabeth Brinton, who's with the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, known as SMUD, is that right? Perfect, good. Troy Batterberry from Microsoft Hohm is here. I'd like to welcome Troy. Charlie, I'm going to say Huizenga, did I do that right? Close, good, from UC Berkeley and Adura Technologies. John Steinberg, who's the CEO of EcoFactor. Steve Vassallo from Foundation Capital, welcome you, and tonight. And of course the moderator, Katie Fehrenbacher from Earth to Tech. And so everyone, thank you for being here tonight. So. Before we get on with the program, let me make a couple of announcements on behalf of the club. This is, again, a terrific program tonight, but pointing out things that are up and coming. On the 13th of April, there's a cloud computing program, which probably has a little bit to do with the grid as well and things like that. But that is sold out, so know about it, but it is sold out. On the 21st of April, there's a program about the commercialization of space and the space economy associated with that, which is kind of fascinating, giving a lot of the new trends in government funding and public-private partnerships. On the 29th of April, there's a Women in Tech program, an executive roundtable. There'll be executives from Intel, Google, Nokia, Better Place. Ann Winblad from Humber Winblad Ventures will be the moderator. She does a terrific job of sort of bringing a dinner table conversation-like style to the program, and this will be, I think, the second year we've done this program, third year, and it's always a really good one. On May 4th, Tim O'Reilly is going to lead a conversation with John Seeley Brown and John Hagel. For those who don't know those two, they've had a lot to do with the things that we're living and breathing every day in the tech industry. And Tim will do, I'm sure, a great job of pushing them around on a topic that calls out, quote unquote, when push turns to pull. And so they'll be talking about a lot of real-time and fun things about how we do business today. And then finally, on the 19th of May, the 12th annual Top 10 Tech Trends Award program will be going on. It's one of the most popular programs the club produces each year. And everyone knows the Churchill Club is a nonprofit, and if you're not a member, consider being a member. You can go to the website and find out about that, but we, as a group, bring together these kinds of great programs. So final announcement really is that if you're tweeting tonight, feel free to use the # Churchill Club, so that anyone can follow your conversation. So finally, I'll introduce Katie and let her get on with the program. She's the founding editor of EarthToTech.com, a media site in the GigaOhm network. She focuses on green tech, innovation, and entrepreneurs. Before that, she covered broadband and mobile at GigaOhm. She's worked at Red Herring and Gadget, Yomiuri Shimbun, and the Japanese largest daily newspaper. She covered Silicon Valley. She's been online and in print at various places from the New York Times and Business Week, CNN, Reuters, BBC, The Economist. And on the personal side, she was a junior Olympic volleyball champion. And she doesn't drive a car. She doesn't eat meat. But she flies around a lot, so she's got a bad carbon footprint. So thank you, Katie. Great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Like you said, I'm the editor of Earth to Tech, and we focus on green technology, entrepreneurs, and innovation. And a lot of the focus that I look at is the smart grid. And like you said, you know, what's happening with the smart grid now? Within the industry, it seems like everyone should be talking about the smart grid, but actually a study came out a couple weeks ago, and 65% of consumers don't actually even know what the smart grid is. So it's just starting to come into mainstream dialogue. But I just want to kind of kick it off and let our panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their projects and how they touch with the smart grid. So if you can just start.
Thank you. Elisabeth Brinton, and I'm the Chief Business and Public Affairs Officer for Mutt. And it's nice to come home to Silicon Valley. I'm an expat, a former member of the founding executive team of LoudCloud, and prior to that, my own entrepreneur. I founded a company, was CEO, and took it to successful exit. And so I was laughing with some of my colleagues here on the panel before and why I would go to utility. Well, we are really, I think, at the epicenter of revolution that we call smart grid, clean technology. And so it really attracted someone like myself who loves the practical commercialization of technology in a very real way that changes the world, benefits the planet, helps consumers. And so that's what drew me to SMUD. And SMUD is community-owned. We're a nonprofit utility, sole focused on electricity and the service delivery. We have some of the lowest rates in the nation, as well as we are a pioneer in advanced renewables. And so going back 30 years ago, we pioneered utility-scale solar, for example. And so it's just an incredibly exciting place to be. Personally, I think I have the best job. I get to focus on where we're going next, our corporate strategy, our partnerships, alliances, and really solving that nexus of how we keep things affordable and practical for our consumers, and at the same time, high energy quality, reliability, and all the things that are important. So it's a ton of fun, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, and my name is Troy Batterberry. I'm a 13-year veteran with Microsoft. And about 3 years ago, I went off, got married, and basically went through a professional midlife crisis during a honeymoon over to Mount Everest. And when I came back, I approached the executives within the company and told them that I needed something completely new, something completely different to rekindle my passions. And they came back to me after a little bit of thought and said, you know, we think information technology can play a bigger role in helping with the energy problem that the world faces, which is a big societal, worldwide problem. They said to go off and take a look at that, and if there's an opportunity for Microsoft to do something there, that I could go ahead and launch that business. And that's kind of how Microsoft Hohm was born. Microsoft Hohm is a residential energy management app and platform that allows both consumers and utilities to reduce their energy costs. First through providing more information, but eventually through providing automation such that the appliances and devices and electric vehicles in their household are automatically managed to reduce their energy usage.
Great. I'm Charlie Huizenga. I'm on the faculty in the architecture department at UC Berkeley, where I teach and research areas of energy efficiency in buildings, which has been my focus for the past 30 years or so. I must say, in the last few years, it's been very invigorating and rewarding to see the interest in a topic that I've been interested in for many years, and watching the sort of attention that I think it deserves at the public at wide. And I would say that I think if it sounds like 35% of the public know what the smart grid is, I think they're just above the energy industry in terms of understanding what that might be. So that's probably a pretty good sign, I'd say. Yeah. The last 3 or 4 years, I've taken a detour, sort of an entrepreneurial detour, with a company called Adura Technologies, which spun out of research I was doing at UC Berkeley, looking at ways of using wireless networking in buildings and finding out how we can make buildings operate and work more efficiently and better for the occupants. And that's an energy management company focused on wireless lighting controls, primarily as an initial strategy to reduce energy use in commercial buildings. And where we found we've been able to reduce lighting energy use by about half in commercial buildings. And just to set a sort of a marker there, buildings in the United States use about 2/3 of the electricity. It's a big piece of the energy pie. And in commercial buildings, lighting is about a 30 to 40% of the electricity use. So it's a big piece of the pie. It's a big way to make a dent in carbon footprint immediately, which got me really excited about this application and trying to commercialize that. So that's been a recent focus, which has been a very interesting, enlightening experience for the last few years or so.
John Steinberg from EcoFactor, and I think, Katie, you mentioned that consumer awareness of the smart grid is very low, and I think there's at least one really good reason for that, and it's something that's been largely missing from the discussion of the smart grid, which is a compelling consumer value proposition, something that makes sense for consumers, and that's exactly what we focus on. We do residential energy management, and we're focused initially on space heating and cooling, which represents roughly half of the energy spend in the average American home. So that's $1,000 a year in the average American home going through that 20 or 30-year-old box on your wall. And we are able to save 20 to 30% of that spend. And we can do that without asking for sacrifice from the consumer. We're not asking people to be uncomfortable. We're not asking people to give up control, and we're not asking them essentially to do anything. It's an automated system that shaves little bits, corners off of the load here and there, and when you add it up at the end of the month, it's 20 to 30% of savings.
Great. So I'm Steve Vassallo. I'm a partner with Foundation Capital. We're a diversified venture capital firm up in Menlo Park. About 8 years ago, a number of us there sort of looked at the energy ecosystem and utilities and said, there's probably an interesting way for information technology to have a part in industries that really up to that point had been left for dead in this regard. And so we basically started investing through a number of different sort of interesting projects, companies that we repotted from parts of the world like Wisconsin and or parts of the country like Wisconsin, born out of bowling alleys where we had to eat fried Twinkies in order to win the entrepreneurs over to prove to them that we were real, that we were real operators, and startups coming out of Dartmouth and many other places all over the country. And we have over the last 8 years invested in 5 companies that are focused on the smart grid. One of them is public now, Enernoc, which is a demand response company based back in Boston. Silver Spring Networks, which is one of the large providers of communications infrastructure for the grid. eMeter, which is doing applications and middleware, Control4, which is working in the home, trying to bring sort of some of the awareness and engagement aspects. We also have a number of other companies focused on the built environment. But what I would say is we've taken a different approach to clean tech investing that has been much more focused on the demand side, on much more efficient use of existing infrastructure. How can we bring information technology into those markets and into those environments such that we can use those existing infrastructure much, much more efficiently?
Okay, thank you. So to give you guys a little bit of perspective on the smart grid market, I just want to ask some of the panelists, like how big is this market that you're selling into right now? I think probably start from the entrepreneur angle because you guys are going to be, the most bullish on that. But from Charlie and John's perspective, how big is this market?
It's infinite.
It's massive.
Right? Yeah. It is a big market. I mean, there's $1 trillion spent on energy in the United States every year. It's a big number. And so no matter how you slice it, it's a big market. The trick is, how much of that market is accessible. And as you're saying, how can you, provide these compelling value propositions, which is an interesting dance between technology, policy, regulation, and how does that all fit together to make something work? And so I think the market is big. How much of it accessible remains to be seen. I think people are struggling to figure out how to fit into it. But I think it's going to happen, and we'll figure out how to make all those pieces come together. But there's no question about the size of it.
The market size is the first thing you learn to talk about when you approach somebody like Steve. And the good news about this space is that you don't have to spend a lot of time on that part of the story because it is a very large market. The piece that we're focused on, as I mentioned earlier, the average American home spends $2,000 a year on energy, and there are 110 million American households. That's compelling math.
Yeah, so say, Troy, from a Microsoft perspective, huge company, how much are you guys spending on energy or on these types of projects?
Well, we're not sure how much we're spending in R&D, but to kind of to double down on what they had to say, I mean, this is a massive market, and just on the generation side, excluding all the fuel and costs of operating the plants today, there's going to be trillions of dollars spent adding new generational capacity over the next decade, and we know smart grid technologies can be used to forego the investment of brute force generation, and instead doing a better orchestration of how demand is leveled across households and businesses and so forth. So there's a tremendous opportunity in the billions of dollars a year for software and information technologies to make a difference and forego those capital investments. So we do think this is a big opportunity for the company, and we're investing accordingly.
Katie, I'd make one other point, which is if you look at industries and you were to line up investment in R&D as a percentage of revenues, if you look at the right end of the spectrum, or I should say the end of the spectrum where it's the least, is basically railroad industry spends the least amount. Next up is building materials, and after that is electricity infrastructure. So the heartening part for entrepreneurs is massive market, massively underinvested.
Okay. So then where are we in the stage of this market? Is it very, very early days? Are we starting to kind of hit where, entrepreneurs can make money? I guess, we can start from any perspective.
Well, I'll jump in from a utility perspective. Actually, as a purchaser, we're really ramping up. Even without the stimulus influx of dollars, we're ramping up to spend to modernize our grid, which from a pure utility perspective, smart grid is about modernizing infrastructure that's essentially stayed the same since the days of Edison over 100 years ago. And so we recognize from our business benefit, to give you an idea, if we can gain 1% of grid efficiency on our own network, that translates into about $12 million annually of savings for us as we run our business. That's just 1%. And then you take that forward, and we also see the consumer benefit in the value proposition. So to give you a sense of real dollars, for us, we're going to be spending $500 million in the next 2 years on smart grid-related technology projects, from the energy advanced renewable side all the way to home performance solutions and software, and like with Silver Spring Networks and everything in between. And that's just in the next basically 24 months. And on track, and our supply side costs, we're spending close to $2 billion annually. So we're just one, and we're a fairly small utility. So that you take those numbers and you begin to multiply that out. And so in terms of market maturity, I think you're going to see in the next 2 to 5 years in the utility sector space for companies that sell to utilities, a tremendous opportunity for market growth.
Do you have certain, if you could break it down between we're investing in distribution, we're investing in the consumer piece?
Well, the biggest dollars in terms of spend are on the what we would consider the utility back end. Distribution automation, for example, we're going to be spending about $100 million on distribution system automation. And for those of you who may not know what that is, the distribution system for a utility is how the electrons get from the big high voltage transmission, they get lowered into a voltage, typical like 220 kilovolts, go into your house. So the distribution network is what you see when you see the power poles around your neighborhood or in the city. That distribution network is in the most dramatic need of an upgrade, and so that's where we're going to be putting the biggest amount of spend. So companies that can help us with network automation, software, infrastructure that helps us make that aspect of the grid automated and intelligent, that's where we're going to get a huge amount of spend. We're also spending on the energy efficiency on the consumer side. We're partnered with Microsoft, with Hohm. We're looking at several different innovative types of companies on the consumer side, basically taking your smart meter, how you take your smart meter and then provide the consumer benefit through thermostat automation software, all different types of things that create real tangible solutions. And I love what John mentioned. It can't be a sacrifice to the consumer. It has to be convenient, easy, out of mind, simple and friendly. And so we're looking for business partners that have those types of solutions that are really easy.
Steve, what do you think? And you've been looking at this industry for the past 5 years, invested in all these companies. is this just the very beginning of the smart grid ecosystem?
So, yeah, our sense is for certain that this is a multi-decade investment cycle that we're going to see. And the utilities, I think, are obviously hugely incentivized to do this right now through many different federal funds. But there has also been a lack of investment in infrastructure, not with the more forward-leaning, but across the board in the United States. There's sort of been these sort of ebbs and flows, and we happen to have just be coming out of one of the low points. I would say for us as investors, when we look at markets and which companies are making money in this sort of energy technology meets information technology, the companies that have been focused historically on commercial industrial market opportunities, so where there is a business case, where it's not an emotional decision, where an individual isn't doing it because they feel good about it or because they want to be green, but where a business is actually making a case and doing a ROI or a payback analysis, those are easy sales. Enernoc, which this demand response company back in Boston, has probably the next best business model than Google, right? It's sort of one of these models where there is a sort of self-reinforcing aspect to it, which is, I'll explain it really quickly, but basically what Enernoc does is it approaches utilities and said, how about if I sign up a bunch of your very large energy-using customers, and I'll get them to, during these peak periods in August, here in California, maybe it's also in January, February, and back east, and I'll get them to shed non-critical load, a third of the lights in the lobby, the pool pumps, or the water for the water fountains, and things like that, and I will effectively take this load off the grid, and you pay me to go do this. It's cheaper than you would spend to go build a peaking power plant. I will sign them up. I'll pay them to be a part of this program. I'll pay them when they shed the load. They'll also reduce their energy spend because of it. So it's one of these business models that everyone wins in. And Enernoc has no problem closing sales because it's just a very easy sale. It's much different than saying to, for example, a homeowner, I'm going to save you, $10 a month, or I'm going to save you $3 a month, or on that order. So we've tended to focus on businesses, startups that have an addressable market which is economically motivated rather than emotionally motivated.
I think certainly everyone who's in this space would agree that we're still at the very early stages of a very large market. We may all be drinking the same Kool-Aid, but I think we're all going to agree on that. But I think there are also some interesting sort of indications that maybe we're at the end of the beginning. And I think there's sort of two arguments for that sitting here in the circle. Echoing what Steve was saying, in the very beginning, new markets tend to focus sort of on the large commercial customers. And we are focused, in essence, on consumer value, which is sort of an indicator that perhaps the market is maturing a little bit. I think the other way of looking at sort of some maturity coming to this market is that until fairly recently, everyone who was playing in the space, in a sense, was sort of a standalone player, an Enernoc or some of the other portfolio companies that you've already invested in. And the fact that Troy is sitting here, the fact that Microsoft is in essence making a play in the space, I think speaks to, in some sense, that we've come of age to some degree.
Yeah, just to add to that I think I totally agree with what both of you just said, and it is a huge initial market as we described. There are lots of opportunities right now to make a good business model in larger than modest, I'd say, scale. But what is going to happen as we transition out of the end of the beginning, as I think is a good way to describe it, John, is that there's going to be a lot of things that are going to come together, and suddenly things are going to be enabled that will come at very low cost. So that right now, for example, in our business, we have to make a sound business case that you have a good ROI on this investment, and it's a great decision to make now. But in a couple of years, when other things start to come together in the marketplace, there's going to be a lot of other things that are going to come along at very low marginal cost to really increase the value of that investment. And I think now that's hard to sell, and you can't necessarily sell on that, but it's going to happen. It's inevitable, and that's going to really, I think, accelerate the market as we get out of this initial stage.
When we first entered this business, we looked first at the size of the market, and I think we all agree that it's a very large market. The second thing we looked for is what changes are taking place within the industry that create the opportunity for a technology company such as Microsoft. And what we determined was there were two key changes related to the business opportunity. The first was growing demands, that society needed more and more electricity, whether it was due to more people, more consumer electronics, more air conditioning, and then on the horizon, the advent of the electric vehicle. The other key change that we saw coming was green government policies that were fundamentally changing the way that utilities could address those growing demands. In the past, perhaps they would build a large coal plant, but more and more at the state and federal and even at the international level, coal is no longer an option. And in its place are coming things such as energy efficiency and zero carbon energy sources. And those sources, solar and wind, tend to be variable and inconsistent and kind of benefit from finally having that closed loop between supply and demand where you have that feedback loop. Those two changes are creating the opportunity, but unfortunately in the short term, say over the last 12 to 18 months, demand has actually been flat across many of the utilities in the United States because of the economic problems that we've experienced. Historically, if you look back over the last 100 years, when you see those recessions, you see electricity demand flatten out, but it always comes roaring back, and there's no reason to believe that it won't come roaring back once again. And when it does come roaring back, utilities will need to find ways to meet that growing demand, and instead of building those coal plants, they'll buy smart grid technologies, and that will create the opportunity really for all of us in this industry to create new products and services to address that market need.
Okay. We've been talking a little bit about government policies and trying to sell and get ROI for your customers, but the smart grid has gotten a massive stimulus injection this year, $4 billion for those who have not been following the industry. How has those stimulus funds affected your companies positively and even negatively?
I think for us, there really hasn't been an impact. I think actually one of the smartest things I heard said about the impact of the stimulus was your partner, Warren Weiss, who pointed out that it had, in the short term, actually a pretty negative impact because everyone was sitting around waiting to see what the DOE was going to do before they entered into not just contracts they thought might be funded, but pretty much anything else, and it just froze the market for a while. We aren't really focused on the places where the stimulus money, by and large, has been directed, so it really hasn't had a large impact on us.
Well, I think it has on.
In our case, it has been an impact in that essentially you're dealing with residential consumers. We're dealing with commercial buildings, and one of the large commercial building owners is the General Services Administration at the federal level, or the California Department of General Services. And so these state and federal programs have been really important for us. As we move from sort of smaller projects to very, very large projects, it's been a key, that incentive to make that jump, having the support and the funding for these state and federal programs has been really critical for us. So it's, I think that's the difference between residential and commercial. Basically, the funding has been primarily in the commercial sector and for the facilities within the federal and the state government. So.
Elizabeth, from your perspective.
From a utility perspective for SMED, we've competed successfully, and we have received over $500 million in Department of Energy stimulus funding. And for us, what that did, it didn't change the path we were on. It accelerated the path that we were already committed to. And we were successful in those competitive grants because of the track record that we had laid over many, many, many years in terms of advanced R&D and proven to the Department of Energy that we were actually able to implement these types of projects. So, for example, with Smart Grid, we already had our contract with Silver Spring Network. We were already down the path at the time when we applied for the stimulus. So what it's done for us, and hopefully we see this as a tremendous economic benefit for our greater region, because we're now able to accelerate our development and deployment of these technologies and engage other companies and engage in contracts with these technology companies. And so we're really excited about that. So we're seeing that, again, you take $500 million that we have to spend in 3 years. And so if you think about that, you ask how, my life is really stressful, actually. I was on
woe is you, huh?
Yeah, and so don't call me, my phone's ringing off the hook. But It's incredibly exciting because we see this as a transformative opportunity, because what the stimulus is doing is putting on fast track this commercialization of a vision that we've had as a utility for a long time, and enable us to bring that forward and really bring that to market. And one of the things I have to say for the companies in the audience, we're looking for technologies. We're not going to make a bet on something that's risky, because we have direct accountability to our customer owners. So we're looking at technology. For example, one of the companies we're partnering with is technology that came originally out of UC Davis, and it has really been tested. It's gone through some legs. It's been actually borrowed and morphed from aerospace. We're borrowing it, moving it over. So one of the things to keep in mind is, how can you take innovation that's been proven to some degree in another sector and apply it to our sector, because we also have to mitigate risk. And so we're looking in terms of our investments how we can do it wisely, and how we can take this acceleration and create essentially this market or economic uplift. But it's got to be fundamentally, it's got to work, it's got to be reliable, it's got to be provable. So that's something that to think about in terms of, if you're thinking about the utility marketplace, is that we are fundamentally conservative organizations. So we're huge believers in technology, but we can't afford a miss with our customers. So that's something to keep in mind.
What was that technology you guys are using?
I can't announce it
No
yet.
comment.
No
Okay.
comment.
Well, one quick follow-up on that, which is sort of the flip side of what what you're describing with the let's wait and see what's going to happen, is that with this rush to spend all this money, which is a real concern. I mean, people laugh at it, but
It's
one thing that does is that it, putting my research hat on for a minute, it creates this weird cliff, where if you're not ready, if you're not shovel ready, right, if you're not going to be able to spend all this money by September 10th or whatever it might be, then you're out of it, right? And so it's kind of a perverse source of funding in a way for really advancing technology forward in a consistent, logical way, because it's sort of, there's this big gap there where if you don't make it by then, you're kind of out, right? So
Charlie's making a really good point, which is important to us on the investing side. And to Elisabeth's comment, we actually, some of our largest customers in some of our smart grid companies had very large deployments underway before any of the ERA funding was announced. In fact, I think SMUD already was a
correct.
customer.
That's right.
PG&E already had, I want to say, sort of 750,000 smart meters through Silver Spring.
Yeah, this is through Silver Spring, right?
Exactly. And by the way, the business case for, I'm guessing for SMUD, but it certainly was the case for PG&E, was operational efficiency. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. It makes sense. It reduces our operating expenses. It's solving sort of this anomalous use case where there's still a guy who, in most parts of the country, jumps over your fence and is chased out of your yard by a dog trying to read your electric meter. And so this is an obvious piece of technology that allows you to do this remotely. And we were doing a lot of pre-stimulus funding deployments. The great part about the stimulus funding is it just put a massive booster rocket on those projects. So, but as an entrepreneur, be somewhat circumspect if your entire business model is betting on a stimulus check coming out of Washington, D.C.
In terms of innovation, I mean, the stimulus funds were on deployments, right? I mean, from your perspective, what's going to be next on the horizon for innovation for the smart grid? I focused a lot on looking at smart grid software, but there's going to be innovation in the software and the hardware as well.
Definitely. So when we look at the smart grid, and it's just sort of a definitional thing, we think about the grid is a layer of electricity infrastructure, and that infrastructure is not going anywhere. That's all of the transmission towers, the capacitor banks, the switch reclosers, all the stuff, the kind of more industrial technology that's been with us, as Elisabeth pointed out, for the last 100 years. The information architecture we think about as an overlay on top of that, and we're only just getting started. Some of the companies we're working with are just focused on distribution network, or they're focused on distribution but are starting to nibble away at other aspects. So they're starting to make inroads into the home with products or services that are like what Microsoft's doing with Hohm. They're also starting to make inroads towards the substation. So substations today in the United States, roughly 60% of them are over 40 years old. And substation is one of those sort of little nucleus network nexus hubs where if you have a problem there, you can take out thousands of homes. And for folks who live in the area, we took out one transmission line when a plane hit it in East Palo Alto maybe about a month and a half ago. That took out all of Palo Alto for 10 hours. So take out a substation and you're in big trouble. I think what we're starting to see is innovation going all the way back up into the substation, into the transmission network, sensing technologies, the networking layer, the communications on top of this existing infrastructure is sort of next step. What comes after that, I would argue, is the layer of applications. If you think about this almost from an OSI stack metaphor, for all the folks who are sort of familiar coming at this from an IT perspective, there are obvious applications today. There's the outage management applications, there's the remote metering, there's the turning meters on and off, all the stuff that we sort of just assume is going to happen with a more intelligent network on top of it. There are a whole bunch of other applications we haven't thought of yet. In fact, there's bright entrepreneurs around the world who are going to think of these great applications the same way that Tim Berners-Lee couldn't have thought of Facebook or Google for that matter. So we believe that there's going to be a lot of innovation. Some of that innovation is going to happen on the consumer side, like what Microsoft's doing. A whole lot of it, which is largely being overlooked, is going to happen on the utility side. And so we are funding entrepreneurs who are working on utility scale or utility-facing applications that allow them to manage this network much more efficiently and effectively. We are looking at applications on the home side, and we have a company, Control4, that's doing that. But there's going to be a platform of applications that get built out, some of which are obvious today and some of which we're just not smart enough to figure out yet.
Are you investing a lot more in utility-facing applications, would you say, versus consumer side?
Well, we already have a company focused on the consumer side, so we sort of felt like one was enough there. But for sure on the utility side, and it's everything from network management, kind of again sort of grungy, less sexy applications, but which for a utility is which has been heretofore really been operating without a lot of information technology infrastructure, is a massive opportunity for them and a pain point. And I'm curious actually to get Elisabeth's point. If you look at the average age of an IT executive inside of a utility, it's north of 50 years old. This is what Jim Rogers at Duke is telling us. So you've got a whole new generation of IT savvy people like Elisabeth, like Andy Tang at PG&E, who came out of Intel and HP and these organizations that are getting smarter about it, but they don't have the tools and the infrastructure yet to deal with the tsunami of data that's coming at them from these real-time networks.
Well, I have to jump in and totally agree with what you're saying, and I have to say, it's all point of view, because for us, these, quote, not so sexy things are incredibly sexy. And, I've always been an infrastructure person, but I hearken back to something when I was working with Mark Andreessen. He used to talk about, the gold rush. Everyone talked about the gold miners and everything like that. Well, what was the unsexy market? Who got really wealthy? It was the pick and shovel and Levi jeans and the folks that were doing the unsexy infrastructure. And so the utility market is huge. And I'll give you an idea of a pain point to follow up what you were just saying, Steve, is that we as a utility, we face $1 billion a day fine because we're considered critical infrastructure. We're tracked by Homeland Security. We have an obligation to serve load 24/7, 365 to the zillionth nines. When I came from IT and here in Silicon Valley, I used to think that we were really hot on reliability. Then I came to electricity utility, and it's completely at a whole nother level. And we talk about it around our boardroom. I mean, that's grown-up money. When you think about it, you can get $1 billion a day fine if you create a blackout or make a mistake. And you talk about the vulnerabilities of the grid. That's where we are hungry for technology solutions that help us as grid operators. And in utility speak, you have your PSO, which is your power systems operations, which includes the overall grid, your balancing authority, your transmission, and then you have your DSO, your distribution system operators. And so what's so exciting about smart grid and the efficiency, that not only the benefit financially to the utility, which when you're a nonprofit utility like SMUD, we translate that into low rates for our consumers. But so you have the financial benefit, but then you also have the protection around reliability, which is viewed as mission critical. It's viewed as national security. It's viewed, what would we do if we didn't have electricity? We need it. So the type of solutions enable us to get visibility in and be able to monitor as we're trying to move to doing the right thing with the low carbon future and making a transition to these types of renewables. And someone earlier mentioned intermittency. That's one of the most difficult challenges if you take the physics of it. And I have a science background. I think about the physics of this problem is that the wind blows when the wind's going to blow at the whim of Mother Nature. The sun shines, clouds come across, that changes the efficiency output of your PV when the cloud comes over. Stuff like that. You take that at a massive scale and you take all that electrons and they're going to hit your grid at different times and variations and voltages. That's a really difficult problem to solve. So one of the reasons why utilities have this new market is that technology hadn't been invented yet to help us solve these problems. So we had to stay very much in the physical world. Now we can make a transition into more of the digital world because technology, cloud computing, other things have caught up to enable that. So that creates this huge pent-up demand now, I think, for market.
And I think one thing I'd like to add to that is we often think about the smart grid. It seems to me, that's my perspective, that it kind of ends at the smart meter, at the building. And at the building scale, you can't do that kind of thing. I mean, one of the problems we have with building energy use is that people only have data at the building meter level, and they don't really know what to make of that. You don't know where it's going, when it's being used, how it's being used. And so extending that smart grid from the meter into the devices that are actually using energy in the building, whether it's lighting or plugs or motors, individual devices that can then be intelligent, know when to send information back about their usage, know how to control their usage, is the only way it's going to really make the other part of that work. So it's both ends of these things of this sort of network have to come together. And both the meter upstream to the utility, and then downstream into the actual end device that's using the energy is where it's going to be critical.
Good.
I think that's one of the deep insights and one of the big trends that I think you're going to see in the smart grid as we go forward here is that today, if you ask someone what's the smart grid, people tend to talk about meters and the utility-owned infrastructure. And I think, again, one of the sort of rites of passage of this industry as it matures is that I think in 5 or 10 years, that's actually going to be a relatively small part from a functional standpoint of the smart grid. The smart grid is going to be the things that Charlie's company installs in commercial buildings and that we help manage in residential buildings and that is going to do an awful lot of the heavy lifting, but that isn't going to be that sort of utility-owned kernel that originally was what people thought of as the smart grid.
So you think innovation will shift to the kind of endpoints of the network to speak IT language?
Well, I don't know if I'll go so far as to say it will move there, but it will certainly expand to there, yes.
Okay. What about electric vehicles? We were talking about this before the panel. Is that a killer app, or is that the pain point for the utility? Troy, you had a big announcement last week.
I certainly believe electric vehicles are a killer application for electricity, and one of the many reasons why is they consume such an enormous amount of electricity. When an electric vehicle is charging, it's equivalent to the rest of the entire load of the house. So you effectively double the load within that household just with one electric vehicle. Don't mind if you have 2 or 3 in a family. So a tremendous load on the grid, and there are multiple problems that causes. The first one is, well, do you have enough generational capacity to serve that electric vehicle? The second problem is, do you have enough transmission capacity to get those electrons into the household? And then dovetailing on the last point that Steve made, do you have enough distribution capacity at the local level, the neighborhood level, to deliver those electrons? And that could potentially be the biggest problem in the short run with the electric vehicle as we see the Jones effect, where these electric vehicles move into small pockets of neighborhoods and you see 3, 4, 5, or 6 electric vehicles put on a single distribution link. You can create a stress to the point where that distribution link will fail and cause that enormous reliability problem that Elisabeth mentioned. So we think it's an incredible problem, but it's also an amazing opportunity in that it's discretionary when these vehicles charge. If they charge at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m., the consumer probably doesn't care all that much. So that's a great opportunity to reduce costs for the utility, to reduce costs for the consumer, and to enable these variable generational technologies such as wind, which are inconsistent. So we think that's an amazing opportunity, and it's one of the reasons why we launched our partnership with Ford Motor Company last week, where Microsoft Hohm will provide the charging infrastructure for Ford electric vehicles, starting with the Ford Focus next year.
I'll have to add, we're a firm believer in electric transportation, electric vehicles. We see this as a market readiness is going to take a little bit more time, where the real benefit to the community and to the utility and to the general public in terms of carbon reduction and the environmental impact is really, and the air quality and the other impacts, is really going to take critical mass. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand at the panel, and so we've been doing some market readiness studies and looking at some supply curves and looking at when the market, we really see the first beginning stages of critical mass not hitting until like 2025. So one of the things that we believe and agree that solving and having a killer app around the electric charging for a plug-in vehicle, and also more importantly actually storage, and figuring out the storage nuance is very, very important. But if you're looking at it, and Steve, you can jump in, if you're looking at it from a venture capitalist perspective, you're looking at what's a company and a business model that's going to get me the return and have the merit, essentially, the level of investment today. I would have to push back and have a little counter position, which is saying that, this is very, very important, but it's going to take a couple decades, not just years, a couple decades for this industry to mature to the point where you're going to start getting the return if you're an investor and you're looking at it from an entrepreneurial and startup perspective. Now, that said, to go back to what Troy was saying, we also are partnered with the automakers. We've been an early market leader in electric transportation going back over a decade at SMUD, and one of the pioneers around electric transportation. And we really believe that there's tremendous opportunity and tremendous good, both in terms of the environment as well as social benefit with electric transportation. But it's a tricky one. We run ourselves as a business. We also have an advanced R&D team. We've invested a lot of economics research in studying different business models and business cases and return. And I'll be really candid with this audience. We are not seeing the numbers. And so as a utility, we're investing for the good of the cause, but it's not going to give us a return either. And so right now, one of the things that's happening through stimulus dollars and others, you're seeing a subsidization of the commercialization of electric transportation. So the real question is going to be, after subsidization goes away, and what happens with oil prices is going to have a huge impact on shaping this market. That's going to be then the question I would ask 5 years from now. Where is it really going to make sense, and how is the market going to shape up, and what are the solutions that are going to become viable?
Troy, would you agree with that? Are you ready to wait for the home auto OS 3 decades away from now?
Well, I think they are going to become popular, and I think there are two key variables that are going to impact the prevalence of the electric vehicle. The first one is, as Elisabeth mentioned, is the price of crude. And the second one is battery technology. And if battery technology continues to evolve and storage grows, I think the economics will work in the favor of the consumer, and these cars will become very, very popular. I've had a chance to drive some of them, and they're quite impressive. They're not quite what you would expect. They're very performant. In fact, in some cases, the automakers will actually degrade the performance to make it feel more like a gas vehicle, so that the consumer feels a little bit more comfortable behind the wheel. And it's impressive technology, and I think the most exciting thing about the electric vehicle is the potential for how much good it can do to the environment and to the economy. And it's a complete revolution, not only in the transportation sector, but in the utility sector as well. It really spans multiple industries.
Mm-hmm. I think one hurdle we've been talking about is time to market and the price of oil. Other hurdles are clearly in the media the past couple months. There's been some kind of consumer pushback on smart meters and smart grid, and maybe a lack of communication and messaging around, like you said, what the value proposition for consumers for the smart grid and smart meters. How does that kind of backlash affect your markets right now, and what do you think should be done about that, and what do you think the problems are?
Well, we're what should be done about that. But I think, I can't remember what it is. There's a Chinese character that's both danger and opportunity is the way people talk about it. I think there's significant danger here. I mean, going back to the first thing you said when we got started here about the low consumer awareness, you look at those recent experiences and say, well, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Give people a chance to get their act together before consumers have more awareness of this. But I think, again, from our perspective, the reason I think that people have put a foot wrong on this is because when the questions were asked, why should we do this? And Steve, you were talking about this earlier in terms of the case from a utility standpoint from having smart meters is a very strong case. But I've looked at a lot of the filings on this, and the consumer value proposition is either way down the list or not present at all. And I think we have to keep in mind that in the final analysis, the consumers are paying for all of this. And so I think in order to make the smart grid, in order to make smart meters appealing to people, we have to address their concerns. And I think there are some very obvious ways of doing that. Putting a smart meter into someone's house creates the opportunity for that person to save a tremendous amount of money if they manage their energy use based upon the time variant rates that are enabled by a smart meter. Now, that's a very tall order for the average consumer. And when utilities, I just read actually, I think on your site recently,
right.
about Connecticut,
Okay.
where the way they're approaching smart meters is to put in a 10-to-1 ratio of peak rates to normal rates. So $1.60 a kilowatt hour during the high demand times. Now, that actually, there's a lot of good rational reasons for that. Consumers are going to freak out when you tell them that. And it doesn't matter that everyone in the industry knows, well, it's only 1 or 2 hours on a couple of hot days on the year. That's not what people hear. They hear $1.60 an hour and they freak out.
Right.
And their freak out is somewhat justified, I think, because what does the average consumer have in the home today that allows them to manage around that cost? There isn't really much. Yes, there's a programmable thermostat, but nobody knows how to program those. You could unplug your refrigerator, but no one's going to do that. Adapting to these time variant rates is just, it's scary to people, and so they're going to push back.
Right.
And so I think what is necessary in order to get people around this problem, to get consumers comfortable with all of this new technology, is to give them a set and forget, I don't have to do anything way of saving money when these new rates are put in, and then demonstrating to them after the fact, here's how much money we saved you because of this new structure. If you can prove that to people, if you can prove to them that they can save energy without having to do anything with all this new technology, I think they'll accept it.
Yeah, just to add on to your point, we looked at the state of Victoria in Australia, which was having a moratorium on their time of use pricing because a lot of charities had come to the government and proposed that, these time of use variable rates are going to disproportionately affect people that can't, leave their homes, like, the elderly or unemployed. So they were saying adding as much as $250 a year on your bill, and that's what some of the pushback has been in these different locations. Is they've seen this massive jump in electricity because they use that much. But
well, I think if you looked at, the basic complaint of smart meters has been that some people's energy bills have gone up, right? And I think if you looked at all the statistics, I bet a third of the people's energy bills went down, and they, for some reason, didn't complain about it, right? A third of the people's didn't change, and they didn't complain about it, and the third one went up, and they complained about it. And the missing piece there is, as you're talking about, John, is having the infrastructure from the meter inward to understand where the energy is going, how the occupant can manage that, and have tools to manage it so they can respond to these rates and make it a positive thing. But just putting the meter in by itself doesn't really make anything smarter. I mean, all it does is solve the dog bite in the back of the leg, I think, pretty much, right?
Well, so I think you're right in terms of there have to be consumer benefits to for the smart grid, the real value of the smart grid to be realized. Some of those consumer benefits are going to come in the form of reduced cost, reduced expense, because the utility is operating more efficiently. Some of those benefits have to come from empowering consumers, and that's why companies like EcoFactor, and that's why Microsoft's getting in this, and there's many others as well. I think we have to separate some of the sort of the, I'll just call it sort of poor PR by a number of some of the utilities who are working on some of these projects from the underlying value of the smart grid. If you think about your relationship with your utility, and again, most of you are in relatively progressive territory, and Elisabeth has to cover her ears because she's an outlier in terms of how SMUD thinks about customers. I call them customers. They actually normally call them ratepayers in most utility environments, right? So there isn't even the notion of a customer and a user experience and some of the sort of management of expectations and the value that we're creating and why this is important to consumers. And so there's definitely an issue of this industry needs to a great extent needs to all go to sort of PR class and needs a marketing makeover to a great extent. I think that is independent of the sort of the underlying value of smart grid. Smart grid is going to happen because it should happen. It's information technology that we take for granted in every other aspect of our lives that needs to be brought to utility infrastructure. The benefits to consumers absolutely have to get layered onto this, and they will in time. It is going to take time. It is absolutely the case, to the earlier conversation. For everyone in the room who was here in 1994 or was working on the first browsers and Mosaic and that stuff, we all sort of had a feel for sort of what could be possible when you networked all these networks. But it took 10 years to happen, right? And so I think there's a temptation, particularly when you live in this part of the world or on the East Coast, to sort of what I call sort of the 2-10 rule. You overestimate the impact of a technology in a 2-year period, and you underestimate the impact of the technology in a 10-year period. And I think we're gonna see that. We're gonna see the same thing in electric vehicles. But this value is there. There's a lot of reasons why there were. I mean, in the case of Bakersfield, which is sort of underlying in Katie's comment, this was a situation where a utility literally installed smart meters, changed the rates simultaneously in one of the hottest summers on record, and there were a number of customers who effectively hadn't gotten a bill because their meters were unreadable for months, so they got one large bill. It wasn't that the meters weren't performing properly. In fact, all the meters have been independently tested in Texas and California. The issue was you had a sort of consumer, a very small sort of, a couple of aggravated consumers. And by the way, there's literally pictures of some of these people who were complaining who didn't even have smart meters, but they were just jumping on the bandwagon. I mean, this stuff is circulating around. So I guess what I would say is the marketing, the PR piece, we absolutely have to do a better job. Elisabeth's working on this. We talked about it earlier, all the things that we could be doing better and differently. This is a regulated industry, so it's really hard for a PG&E to come out and say, hey, there's a bunch of dumb consumers out there and they're trying to pile on. It's very difficult to manage those situations, but we have to do a better job of communicating with customers and empowering more value proposition as well.
Just before we wrap up for Q&A, I wanted to throw it to Elisabeth. Yeah, I want to know if you think your peers in the industry are, doing an adequate job. Well,
sorry.
Well, as Steve has really described, I think one of the things that's unfortunate is that other large utilities that have a different business model than we do, that are investor-owned, and they did a couple things, and John mentioned one of them. First of all is that they don't think of their customers as customers. They think of them as ratepayers. They have a regulated right to a certain rate of return, and they took this project, a la smart meters, and they said, okay, we need to get a certain amount of return, and they raised rates. So during a recession, during the most disruptive economic challenge and crisis the United States has seen since the Great Depression. So what it did for the technology, which is so sad, is that they created this huge consumer backlash by not properly mitigating and understanding the environment with which they were trying to roll out the new technology. And so as a lot of the dialogue talked about, you talk about meters, you talk about rates. And so the consumer is not disaggregating the difference between the technology and the rate structure. And so what's very unfortunate is some of those larger utilities, again with a different business model, they had to get a certain rate of return. They raised the rates to implement their smart meter program and start on their smart grid path. They also, and so the consumer was then hit with this impact also you add in the summer situation. So one of the things that, again, our business model is different. We're a nonprofit. We did not rate, we don't go to rates for these type of capital projects. We, save away and stockpile and put our money under the bed, as it were, and build our savings account, and then we go and we do a project. And so it's very different. So there's no rate impact for the customers. And so as a result, and also, we're not changing how we bill for our kilowatt hours. So we're completely separating the technology from the rates. And as a result, we have not received any customer backlash, and customers understand that. And we also have rolled it out with a value proposition for them, and what that is, at the first phase, is choice. They're going to get, and this is where products like Microsoft Home come in, they're going to be able to start seeing yesterday's data today. And what that does, right away, before you start having the different types of technologies which are going to be coming in the home, what you can start doing is, if you go to the grocery store and you're shopping, you know what kind of where you are relative to your budget, and you make choices. You say, well, I'm going to get the filet mignon today, but then maybe next week you're going to have Campbell's soup or something. You can make choices to manage your budget along the way in real time. That's never been able to happen with smart meters and just the new data, being able to understand your data without any new technology or devices. You're going to be able to make decisions and say, you know what, wow, I can turn down my AC. I can do things with the technology I have in my house today to help me manage that bill. So we've started and have been doing a lot of customer hand-holding. We also implemented and invested in expanding our contact center, so that as we're rolling out the new technology, and we're not changing our rates, and we're not changing the billing or anything else like that, we're able to take every single customer that has a question, can call and get a live person within 10 seconds. Yes. So that's a cost, as you understand. I mean, contact centers are expensive, but we believe that it's important to invest in that level of personal approach to our customers to help them understand and overcome the fear that has been caused. And so we're taking that approach. We're responding to our customers, we're working with them, and as a result, you see if someone, they've read something in the newspaper, they've heard about the Bakersfield situation, they get their smart meter and they're like, and they call. It's amazing what good old-fashioned customer service and communication diffuses it right away, because there's a trust. And as an honest broker, they realize that we're trying to make money off of them. We're just trying to provide better service, solutions, choice. And by having, and you can go to our website, smud.org, and you'll see a site there, and you can see the Microsoft Home product and other things. And right there online, so as soon as a customer gets their meter without changing anything, all of a sudden they have a benefit. And then we're providing additional education. So that's I think, part of what we forget. We fall in love with the technology. We have to remember that we're all people. And we have emotions, and we have feelings, we have fears, and we have checkbooks. And so if we remember that connection at the very human level, that's what's going to enable the market and products like John's solution and Charlie's solution to really take off and be successful. We make that human connection.
Okay. On that touchy-feely note, I'll open it up to the audience.
Hey, it's real.
Hi there. There's a couple of things that were recently came out in the last couple of weeks or so. One was the introduction of the ENO bill in Congress. We're actually saying that people have a right to get their energy information in a timely fashion. And there's also the letter that just went out to President Obama, asking President Obama to get involved and start a movement in this area. It seems that if the government has to get involved with this, that there seems to be reluctance to give out this sort of information. Just wondering if anyone could comment on that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take a stab at that. One of the challenges with working with utilities in the United States today is the regulations vary from state to state. And some states, such as California, have enacted more progressive policy mandating that this type of energy information be made available to consumers. But in many other states, that policy does not yet exist. The nice thing about the Markey bill, which you referred to, the ENO bill, is it would provide a level playing field where throughout the United States, consumers would be able to access their information, their energy usage and pricing information online, and that would really open up the competitive marketplace to act upon that information and add further value on behalf of the consumer. So I think it's a great bill, and through our trade organization, we actually we signed on to that letter in that bill.
I actually have a question for Elisabeth. So the utilities are spending billions of dollars on technology and almost nothing on consumer education. And the most they, except for SMUD, no, SMUD is incredible. So what I was hoping you would talk about is what you are doing to proactively educate consumers so that they're prepared for this when it shows up.
Well, as I mentioned, and the touchy-feely is, it's all about, I have to laugh on that because as an executive, I actually get customer calls. So one of the things that keeps all of this very, very, very real for me is when I get a customer call or a concern or someone who's excited or happy. So one of the things that we're doing on a practical basis is we're investing millions in a whole variety. We're using all sorts of traditional outreach. Like I mentioned, we're finding that the most power, and there's lots of good data out of UC Davis as well on this in terms of social behavior media, Stanford University, UC Berkeley, a lot of good data out there that demonstrates that the personal touch, communication, is the most effective way to actually influence and win friends. And you think about it in our own communities and so forth. So we're finding that we have, for example, a community engagement department. We literally have feet on the street. We do work with neighborhood associations. We go out to the community where our community is. We're finding we do tremendous amount of work in language with all of our different minority populations. Sacramento is unique. We are actually one of the most diverse communities in the United States in terms of the variety of different languages, native languages spoken, different types of communities. So we spend a lot of time, we sponsor local organizations, NGOs. We do a lot of real grassroots engagement, grassroots campaigns, as it were, to really help people understand and overcome their fears and help them understand how they can navigate their bill and how they can navigate these new technologies. And we love technology. We tweet, we use Twitter, we use social media, our website. Our website, smud.org, is, I think, our hub of the central nervous system of how all of our customer communication is happening. And then we do incentive programs. One of the things that we're doing with some of our stimulus dollars is we're increasing our rebate programs and our incentive programs for new technologies in the homes and so forth. And what we do is we do giveaways and things on our website, and it's really cool. You can see people love stuff for free, and so when you see like we just did, we call it a mow down, where we have customers are able to trade in their old polluting gas-powered mowers and get a free electric mower. And we do this big mow down event on our website only, and it just spikes up. And then, by the way, then they can come and they can learn about energy efficiency, and they can learn about opportunities and stuff like that. And so we do good old-fashioned grassroots marketing.
I'd say one other point just to add on to this is, if you're a utility and you only have 30-day in arrears data on your customer, it's very hard to educate them in terms of how to make better decisions about their energy use. The first step in being able to educate consumers is having much more granular data. So if I can tell you that fridge that you got a rebate for from SMUD and you ended up not throwing it away, but you put it in the garage, and now your energy use is actually more than it was before, I can actually start to give you some of those insights without me even being in your home when I start to have technology like what's made available with a smart meter.
I think they need a vision of where you're going.
Absolutely.
Big picture, as much as before you get to the granular data. There's this big, we're saving the planet. There's this big thing we're doing, and if they know, they've done it successfully in Canada with Hydro One, because they've gone out and done these grassroots things where they go to the tractor pull and the town meetings, and they show them a video that says, here's the vision of what we're doing, and they have people to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, see, the key is you have to make it real, and you have to, and this is marketing 101, you have to connect with your public where you are. And so one of the things we did at SMUD is, well over a decade ago, we invested in building up a state-of-the-art market research department. And our market research department, I could say it would hold its own with anybody. Our gentleman that works on my team that heads it right now, we stole him from Honda. And he did global market research. He's the best of the best. And so we take this very, very seriously. And so our investment in social science and behavioral science and market research, we go out and we pulse our customers every single month on everything and take all of that and then make good decisions about what makes it real. So if you're a farmer and you have an electric well, your needs are going to be very different than a condo dweller downtown. And that's the type of granular understanding that you need to have. And first of all, you have to care.
So I think this is a question for Troy. I'd like to know, maybe you could give us a little peek into what Microsoft is doing, perhaps with the more sophisticated utilities like Elisabeth, between the substation and the meter. What we've been hearing a lot tonight is smart thermostats, electric vehicles, but there's a tremendous amount of assets that are deployed in the distribution system. Right. And I'd like to see where a powerful company like Microsoft may be going with that.
Well, so I think one of the core things that we all have to realize when it comes to the smart grid is many, many different companies need to work together to help solve the problem and address the opportunity of finally creating that feedback loop between supply and demand. And one of the things that we're endeavoring to do with Hohm is we will have a means to influence demand and couple that with intelligence of where the constraints are in the generational, transmission, and distribution networks so that we can curtail demand in the right places at the right time to prevent those traffic jams. And we're working with various transmission and distribution partners to exchange information in real time to shed those load when it's needed or to stimulate demand when it's needed because perhaps we have excess wind blowing in the Columbia Gorge. So that's really the power of the different companies working together, the value that we can create for that industry, and it all kind of starts with software and communications technologies.
May I comment on that too? It's a very, very good question and something that I hope the entrepreneurs out there in this room are going to be giving some good thought to. Just to back up what Troy said, the distribution services layer is so critical. And if you talk about plug-in hybrids, solving some of the key distribution system questions is going to be key. So right now, for example, SCADA and how we're moving with the distribution so we can really look in it and see. A lot of people don't realize that the majority of utilities, if your power goes out, they don't know. You have to call. There's no visibility down at the distribution system layer. So being able to get, again, software solutions that connect up with the layer on top of our grid that enable us to have better reliability and outage management is crucial. And it's a huge value. That's a huge customer benefit. People understand, they want their lights on, keeping the lights on. So there's a consumer benefit that they understand. Utilities need it. The other thing I want to comment on quickly on this note, too, is privacy. And we really haven't talked much about it. But solutions that really can up the level of security and privacy are key. And security from a utilities perspective, and Steve knows this from where we've pushed back with Silver Spring Networks a lot, is that security, like I mentioned, the $1 billion a day fine, those are real. That's when you have those type of fines, and that's just one type of fine we can get. And there's it is really scary to run a utility. And so, you can, everything you do, you're darned if you do and darned if you don't, except we use much worse language than that, in our boardroom, But, so anything that we can find that can help us with reliability and security and make sure that these systems that are mission critical can run, there's a huge market opportunity there.
Yeah, it's Matt Rhodes. I'm a semiconductor communication technology executive. I saw a graph that I see starting to pop up more often. It was originally, I think, done by George Whitesides in Science in 2002 or 2003. And it basically shows the system as a generation going into the United States and application use at the end. And the big takeaway is that more than 50% of the energy is lost before it gets to the application. And the takeaway would be the losses in the distribution system. I guess it's really for you, Elisabeth, but is that really a true statement that the distribution system is losing that much energy as we get it out to the applications? Isn't that really one of the great opportunities for investment in terms of both understanding where we're losing it and returning to that and creating that efficiency in the distribution system?
It starts actually at the transmission layer, and this is the basic physics, is that the higher the voltage to get the electrons, the further the distance, you're going to have greater loss. And so one of the big engineering challenges that we have, we talk about transmission being a key challenge as we try to get more renewables on the grid from the desert and from other places, is that how we're going to be able to capture the loss. And so there's AC and DC, and there's a lot of different design questions about how you can move high voltage long distances at an affordable cost. High voltage is, these lines are in the billions of dollars, are incredibly expensive. And so figuring out how to solve that challenge, that engineering challenge, is a real key priority, I think, for the nation as a whole. And then you get down to the distribution layer, the voltages are lower, you have less of an issue, but it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. And go ahead.
I was going to say, the losses you're citing, so you're talking about the Lawrence Berkeley Labs, 435 quads in. What's usable on the outside is less than, or on the other side is half of that. The majority, the lion's share of the losses are actually in conversion. So in conversion from, say, if you're in a data center coming in at the line, converting to 5 volts for the actually the actual work that gets done on a PCB or in a micro. So the conversion losses from generation all the way through to the end of the wire is roughly half of it. Transmission losses are 7%. So it's the aggregate that you're citing as 2/3, which is right, but it's from a different piece. And by the way, that's why there are companies that are focused on much more efficient power conversion, particularly for very high voltages.
And the trick is the cost. I mean, the percentage, to back up what Steve said, maybe a lower percentage on the transmission layer, but it's incredibly expensive. So that the value proposition there, if you can solve that, is a huge opportunity because the cost is enormous.
My name's Howard Tubman. I'm hearing a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of thoughts and a lot of good ideas. But what about standards and stuff? For example, in California, I know that, for example, the city of Santa Clara owns its own power distribution from generation to delivery. San Francisco's talking about it if they haven't already. There's PG&E that just went bankrupt again, I think. Are we going to end up like the problem we had with the police and fire departments where they can't talk to each other because they're each using different radio waves and different frequencies and incompatible systems? Or is there some overall organization that's going to start implementing some sort of a standard across these?
Well, right here in California, EPRI is working with NIST, which is a national standards organization, and there's incredible work right now with standards. You're kind of mixing the metaphor a little bit. But in terms of utilities, we partner all the time. It's like good old co-opetition. So we partner and we work together constantly. You have to. And that's the right thing to do, and we all do. In terms of standards specifically, there's tremendous investment right now in the shaping of what's going to be the standards for smart grid going forward. Everything from interoperability standards, privacy, security, network security, those types of things. As a matter of fact, we're really proud that good old Sac State in Sacramento was selected in California for the National Smart Grid Center, in part with partnership with SMUD, but serving all of the utilities in all of California. And so that shaping and formulation of what those standards are going to be are happening right now.
I'd make one other comment, which is, so NIST is working on this, but NIST isn't going to lead us. NIST will sort of aggregate the best practices. So the best practices are being developed, as they were in the case of the web, by a very small set of very smart architects who are, to a great extent, sort of working on what we all want to happen in the room, and certainly we as investors, is the HTML over HTTP equivalent for our energy infrastructure. Mm-hmm. That's where we need to get to. That's happening. It's happening sort of one project at a time in some of our companies, in fact, working in collaboration with utilities. Those standards don't exist yet today where you can say that's exactly the thing that everyone needs to do, and it's being slowly evolved. In the case of the interface between meters and homes, and the stuff that Microsoft's doing, and certainly which John will be able to take advantage of at EcoFactor, that's more stable. It's not done, but there's more resonance around what the right solution is there. But I will tell you that the standards issue is is absolutely where we need to take the industry. It feels a little uneasy right now because we don't have that HTML over HTTP metaphor yet.
And I should say too that that's one of the reasons that we feel a lot of stress at SMUD about the smart grid funding, the ERA grants, is that we're getting all this pressure to spend the money, and the standards that we depend on to build something that's going to scale and be sustainable and last are being formulated. So we're really trying to moderate that and partner very closely with the labs, partner very closely with private companies that are utilizing and pioneering these best practices and also borrowing best practices. And that's a nice thing because IT, everything that's been done here in Silicon Valley that's been done with the web, that there's been a lot of lessons learned. And so we're working on understanding what those lessons learned are and going to Microsoft. One of the things that's interesting, Microsoft has pioneered, has led the way, has made very smart decisions along the way, and learned some tough lessons along the way. And so one of the things that gives us confidence in these types of companies is that there's learning there, there's knowledge there. And so we have to balance that, and the standards formation is going to be absolutely critical. And I'll go back to privacy and network security, because those two themes from a utility perspective as we make buying and purchasing choices are going to be key. And when you look at, like we're working with General Electric right now and looking at appliance standards and appliances, as we look at these smart appliances, making sure that consumer privacy is protected is vital, is absolutely vital. You talk about a consumer pushback, if they think Big Brother is going to know when my hairdryer is on or what I'm doing or when I'm home. A lot of people, for example, there's fear of stalkers or, really legitimate safety concerns. And so those have to be solved with technology solutions that can maintain that privacy and show that we can learn from this energy data, apply that in a practical way, but not compromise in any way someone's personal safety.
Is there anything that can be done in terms of changing the regulatory framework, either nationally or at the state level? And if there was one change that you could make, what would that be, and what would the impact from that change be?
I have an easy one. My one change would be for every state for it to be mandated to be in a decoupled regime. So where we are in California, we take it for granted the fact that profits are decoupled from revenues. That's 12 states in the country today, on the order of 12 states. And my corollary to that, so I'll sneak in the second one, is that I actually believe that we need to create a regulated utility set of incentives that actually reward utilities for making energy efficiency investments. So today they capitalize a coal-fired power plant. They can't capitalize an investment in energy efficiency. And if we could give them 25 basis point bump on an energy efficiency investment, and we would actually incentivize the right investments, that would be the next best thing.
Well, I just echo that. I think the emphasis on rewarding investments in energy efficiency, if we look at the real cost of what this is to society of adding new capacity, it's such a good investment. It's so hard to argue against it, but we don't do enough of it, and it's because there's no incentive for the utilities to do so. And it's kind of mind-boggling that it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I would even go a step further, and I totally agree with you. You're spot on there. We talked a little bit earlier about why aren't certain utilities doing things for their customers. Well, the short answer is depending on their regulatory environment, they're actually disincented to drive energy efficiency. It actually harms their bottom line. Many investor-owned utilities today are driven to keep electricity costs down and maximize reliability. It's not to keep their customers happy. That's not their core requirement, or to drive energy efficiency. So I think this issue needs to be addressed not only at the state level, but the federal level.
I think I would throw out my wish list would go even a step further than what Steve mentioned. From a lot of people think the most interesting energy market in the United States isn't California, which is decoupled. It's Texas, which is deregulated. And the incentive structure is, in many ways, much more interesting there than it is here. I know the experiment with deregulation in California was less than pleasant for a whole bunch of reasons, but I don't think that means deregulation is a bad idea. I think it means it wasn't handled well.
Well, there's from our perspective at SMUD, there's no single answer to that question because it's so complex, and as a regulated entity, we live in the world of leg and reg on a daily basis. So I'm struggling to actually come up with a short answer because I have a list about 500 miles long. But I'll start with, first of all, making sure that different utility business models are allowed to exist. That's really important. We've talked about the benefits of utility like SMUD, being able to make sure that consumers and entrepreneurs alike have options in terms of their utility, I think is important. In terms of really moving the market forward, I think what's really important is to stay technology agnostic. One of the things that's a great temptation for legislators and regulators out there is because they read the news and they jump on things, is that they want to go and they want to take a program that's really working well at a place like SMUD and turn it into a mandate. Well, that's really difficult for even an innovative utility like SMUD. Nobody likes to be told how to run your business. And there's not a one-size-fits-all. Climate is different. Weather patterns are different. Consumer choices are different and across the states and different. You look at California, as diverse as we are, we have different weathers, we have different needs. So one of the things that I would say as a core principle from a leg and regulatory perspective is as we move forward in greening the economy and we think about leg and regulatory activities, keep technology neutral. Don't limit innovation by saying, well, now we're going to mandate solar or we're going to mandate energy efficiency this way or be prescriptive. And that's where I think the utilities and large tech companies like Microsoft and new entrepreneurs and all the different stakeholders within our shared interest, we can all unite around those things. And I remember back in the day advocating on Capitol Hill around, talking about the internet and technology. That was a core message back then, was technology neutrality. We need to take that forward because that is something that has been lost in the discussion back in Washington, and it's being lost in Sacramento at the Capitol, and it's being lost at the regulatory bodies, is that it's whatever the sexy thing of the moment. That is a huge limiter to innovation. And we don't know what the right answer is going to be tomorrow. And we need to allow the creativity and the entrepreneurial juices to flow by not prescribing it.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, Sean Dubervac. I'm curious where the sex appeal is. I mean, it seems like we talk about getting the consumer on board, and to really realize the value of the smart grid, we have to get their buy-in. But there isn't yet a lot of sex appeal. I mean, from a consumer's perspective, it fits within home automation, and there is some sex appeal there. But when it comes to energy management, we don't see it yet. So who's going to bring us that sex appeal, and what's it going to look like? Because there are a lot of things happening in the home that are, that have that attractiveness. So.
This is the curse of demand side, and it isn't like Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about 1 million solar roofs, which somehow seems so inspiring to all of us, and it isn't as sexy as talking about electric vehicles and that go 120 miles an hour. But our fundamental belief, and this is certainly, I think, proven out to be the case certainly in the commercial industrial markets, is saving money is actually very sexy. And if I can come into a commercial industrial business and save them $500,000 a year by managing stuff that they weren't managing before and doing it in a way that doesn't change the consumer experience, that has massive impact. So I think the case for the demand side really has to be an economic one. It's hard to make an emotional case around it. I also think that there's an underlying risk that, look, in the long history of human behavior, sacrifice is not a winning strategy. People will, in the short term, they'll jump in front of a train to save someone, they'll run into a lake to pull a dog out, but if you ask them to live in a cold house or drink a warm beer, they're going to throw you into the lake, and they're not coming back after you, right? So I think there is a sort of a marketing makeover that needs to happen here, but I also would encourage all of us, including and entrepreneurs especially, think about the economic case that's to be made, because that is what makes really big companies successful and will get you customers faster than the sex appeal will.
I think Steve is exactly right that that the financial story, that saving people lots of money, is going to be important, but I think, in a sense, that's table stakes. That's not what's going to win the game. I think what's going to win the game is to some degree what you were talking about, which is to go beyond just saving people money and giving them something for free, in essence. And I think it's things like programming your thermostat without ever having to program your thermostat. It's saving you hundreds of dollars a year on your energy bill while making you more comfortable. Those kinds of value propositions, I think, once they're out in the marketplace, are going to be the kinds of things that are going to get people excited because, as you said, there's no sacrifice. It's something for nothing.
Yeah, I think that you've really hit an important point there, which is, and it really gets at your efficiency question too. Your question is, if you say generated, you turn natural gas into electricity at 90% efficiency, and you did the transmission with only 5% loss, and you distribute it for 3% loss, and then you brought it into a room and you had all the lights on really efficiently, and no one is in the room. What's going on there? And what the problem is, you're trying to provide a service here with energy, right? And there's a real disconnect between what the utilities are providing, which is electricity, and the service that electricity provides, right? And so right now there's a brick wall there between giving you electricity coming into your building and then what you do within the building to provide a service, which is really what you want from electricity. You don't want the kilowatt hours, you want something to get out of it. One of the things I think is sexy about it is that there are lots of cases where if you do a better job, as you sort of alluded to, John, here, you make people more comfortable, more empowered by giving them control over their environment in their commercial workspace. You provide a better environment, provide better services, and almost always you do a better job with that, you're going to do it more energy efficiently as well because you're thinking about it, you're doing it, you're managing it, you're controlling it. And so there's a real win-win there. There's a pull from the user side to have a better experience that's coupled with improved energy efficiency and lower resource consumption.
Okay. I'm just going to wrap up real quickly. You had a final thought? Sexy, not sexy?
Yeah, just a final thought on sexiness. I think the sexiness is outside of energy and all this stuff like that. It is going to the TV. It's going to the things we already love. So ultimately, it's a B2B play, is what I would like to say, is that if you're an entrepreneur and you have a solution, make this TV really energy efficient, because people are going to buy their entertainment. They want things that they love that are connected to them, and like lighting, for example, lighting fixtures, good design, something that's elegant and beautiful and doesn't hurt your eyes and you can use. That's where I think ultimately where the money's going to be made, and where because we're going to sneak it all in. We're going to have these solutions that are going to benefit the customers, but what we're finding through all of our market research, they don't want to think about it.
So anyway, I always like to end a program on a sexy note. I thought that was very appropriate. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just actually had a personal plug. My Earth Tech is having a event called GreenNet, which is going to look at a lot of these issues, the smart grid, electric vehicles. Jerry Brown's going to speak. We're going to have a lot of great speakers, and some of the panelists are going to be there speaking as well. So come down and talk to me afterwards. It's on April 29th in San Francisco. But I just wanted to thank the panelists. Thank you so much.
And Katie, we want to join you in thanking the panelists. I want to know how many people would like to see SMUD take over for PG&E in the Bay Area. So on behalf of the Churchill Club board tonight, I'd like to thank John and Troy, Charlie, Elisabeth, Steve. What a great contribution you all have made tonight. And Katie, a great job moderating. We really thank you. And we hope you will all join us in thanking the panel one more time. We have our typical Churchill Club parting gifts for you. These are our famous Churchill Club T-shirts. We'd like you to wear them and promote our club like you promote SMUD. That was really good, Elisabeth. We want to thank, obviously, Microsoft for sponsoring tonight's event and hosting us. And, of course, we wouldn't be here without all of you. Thanks for coming. We hope to see you again soon. Please drive safely tonight.